So that's a very philosophical question, Anand, to define who I am. But for those who haven't met me yet, I've been producing trade shows for about 30 years, owned, built, accelerated, exited back in the 90s with the Off-Price Specialist Show, second largest apparel show in the country at the time. Built the largest trade show in the world for the tea industry. Came over and ran somebody else's company in the cannabis space back in 2014, which is known as MJ Biz. Started out with one full-time employee and scaled them from about 200,000 to 13 million before I exited that company. They went on to sell for 120 million, as you probably saw in the news. But I love creating trade shows, right? They're hugely valuable for any type of marketplace. It really is where business gets done, where deals get done, because as humans, we need to be able to establish a level of trust. We need to be able to build a relationship with somebody before we do business with them. And this is what trade shows do. That's they're markets. People have been using them to trade camels before Christ, so to speak, right? And here we are in the modern world with trade events. But when I was building MJ BizCon, I saw that this was entirely a supply side show, because back in the early, mid 2010s, everybody was getting these licenses. They needed to stand them up. Nobody knew what a cultivation operation looked like or how it was optimized, or a retail store or a brand. So packaging, label makers, light bulbs, all of those things were really critical to the ecosystem in the early days. And what I always saw is that eventually this is going to move, and cannabis is a consumer packaged goods or a CPG industry. And you look at any mature CPG industry, the largest and most important trade shows almost always focus around brands and retailers. And that's really what we're building with MJ Unpacked. It's the only national cannabis trade show that is exclusive. Attendance is exclusive to brand and retail executives with the title of manager hire. So we have a very highly qualified audience. For those who have gone to some other, trade shows, you realize that there's a lot of tire kickers and job seekers and suppliers that are trying to sell stuff, and make it available to accredited investors actively investing in cannabis. And we're looking for intent and potential. So, if somebody's an investment bank, they're technically not an investor per se, but they have access to capital. If they're a bank or a financial institution that's lending into cannabis, we consider that important to the ecosystem. So anyways, long story short, I've decided recently that I'm no longer going to refer to myself as a trade show organizer. I am going to refer to myself as a circus ringmaster, because really what it's about is bringing people into the tent, right? And creating an experience that makes them want to come back and tell their friends about this. And we've been really successful in really about 16 months of becoming one of the top 3 or 4 shows that people talk about in our industry. And we're the new kid on the block.
That's great to hear. Thank you for that background. And that's a very succinct background on a lot of experience you've had. What has been the past events for MJ Unpacked? Can you kind of give us some background on the types of events you've held? And then I see a great new logo and dates in the background, in the virtual background there. So tell us more about what's upcoming.
So, the history of MJ Unpacked, and we launched the company back at the beginning of 2020. It was a very interesting time. We got our initial seed funding, and then in February, and then in March, we couldn't do what we were set out to do. We did pivot and launch a series of virtual events. We did more of them. We did them faster. We did them better than anybody else in the cannabis space. And unfortunately, I don't want to ever do them again. They're very difficult to be able to kind of create the same experience and as well as the same revenues around a live event in a virtual platform. We all, look back at COVID, and realize it was very difficult for a lot of businesses to operate during that time. We decided to kind of pause a little bit, and we decided to insert ourselves as a national event. I held the event the same time as the former company I built, MJ BizCon, back in October of 2021. Really to be as disruptive as possible and show that there is a far better way to organize events that are of high value for the industry. And part of the reason of doing it during MJ BizCon is because I've seen over the years after I left, they've really kind of lost control of their audience. Most of the key decision makers in our industry are going out to Las Vegas during that show, but they're not really going to the show. They're spending time in hotel suites or in hotel elevators or cab lines trying to get from meeting to meeting, and it's very inefficient. And again, this is where trade shows are optimized, is that you create this efficiency for people to have very high level business discussions and get deals done. So we launched our second event in New York in May of 2022. Was wildly successful despite the fact that they hadn't issued a single license in the state, at least recreational license in the state. And then we came back to Las Vegas in the fall of 2022 as well. That show was a little bit softer. Everybody who participated had an exceptionally good show. From the feedback we got from our sponsors and our exhibitors, our attendance was a little off, but all events in the second half of the year were off. There's always this kind of clawback. I hope someday to teach every accounting and finance professional that what marketing is, because when they pull back, whenever there's an economic recession, they're pulling back their travel budgets, their marketing spends, and they're shutting off their funnel for future sales and deals. Unfortunately, but it's human nature. Times are tough. They want to prepare and protect their assets. So we're coming back to New York, and our plans long term are to do two events: a spring and fall event, East Coast, West Coast. But we're going to New York, and they've got the licenses up, getting issued out there. We've got a huge amount of the card holders are registered for our event. We're going to have some meet and greets. We're working with groups in Connecticut and New Jersey to bring a lot of these early stage license holders, and all of the entire cannabis industry is focused on the growth on the East Coast right now. You've been around for a while. We know that what's happening in California and some of the Western states is pretty brutal. Companies are getting shut down. They haven't been able to effectively, control or migrate the illicit or legacy market into the legal, framework of cannabis in those states. This will get solved, and it might be another year or two before we find a solution. And California is still going to be one of the biggest markets in the country, but there's some work to do there on a regulatory and a legislative standpoint to fix that market.
Yeah, and to your point on trade shows, the other great thing that happens is an exchange of experience and ideas. And I think it's great that you've kind of got this West Coast initial event and background experience. That's where the biggest markets are. But now the East Coast is kind of coming online. So I'm interested to see when I attend kind of some of the interactions between established brands or brands that are kind of up and coming in the West Coast, also interacting with folks on the East Coast and distributors potentially on the East Coast.
Yeah, and listen, I mean, this is one of the unique things about MJ Unpacked is this is the only national trade show where you get to see brands from across the entire cannabis ecosystem, from various states, from Michigan, from Missouri, from California, from Washington, that are participating in our show. We have a very unique event design, so those brands can participate at a very cost-effective way with their brand showcases. I love that about our show in the sense that a lot of brands don't have a chance to control their visual merchandising at the retail stores they sell into, so they really get to showcase their products and kind of tell their story behind what their brand means and what their brand is, where their brand's going. But this is where. And again, looking at from experience at mature CPG industries, this is where real wealth creation is going to happen in our space. I know there's been a tremendous amount of investment into a lot of early stage kind of ancillary companies. It was safer investment, but MJ Freeway, for example, is now a shell company that is cryptocurrency mining, right? They were the biggest POS system in the space. I think there's some other ancillary businesses that are not defensible once we see federal legalization, because there's much bigger companies with much better economies of scale that can come in and undermine them and their price points of what they're providing, to the market. But brands, you look at the generational wealth of Seagram's or Anheuser-Busch, Marlboro, these are the brands that are going to be coming out of the market. And we've seen this big paradigm shift where, so much of our early stage industry, the relationship with the consumer was with the retailer. But it's now starting to migrate over to the brands. And this is where brands are going to explode. Valuations, there's going to be a handful of winners and probably a number of brands that do pretty well. And there's going to be a lot of, carcasses on the side of the road. But this is, again, I think we got to look at where the puck's going, and we are going to grow into a mature consumer packaged goods market. And we'll eventually see interstate commerce or federal legalization. And alcohol is a $250 billion industry in our country. We'll see probably, I believe that we could get, to that or beyond in the next 10, 15 years.
That's great to hear. I think those are really important points. As you said, brands are what's really driving or going to drive this industry. And the U.S. is known to be an exporter of global brands. I think we're not going to be any different in the cannabis space. So just to understand kind of your vision for this a little bit better, a couple of things. One, you mentioned the brands can showcase the way they would like to have their products presented in a dispensary. What does that mean? What does it look like to showcase at your event?
Sure. For a brand, I mean, we have our one of our exhibit options or display options is the brand showcase. And again, it's a 7-foot curio case, multiple shelves. They can really kind of do the storytelling that they want their product to stay on a shelf at a retail store, but they have the space to do it, right? Most often they're just delivering the product there, and the retailer is going to put their mints next to the gummies, next to the transdermal patches somewhere in a shelf under a glass case. They really get to kind of do the storytelling. And that's so important for brands to be able to do, of what creates that authentic brand, what's going to resonate with the consumer, how are they positioned in the market. It's not just about price, although there has been a migration to race to the bottom on price in our industry, as you know, in a lot of markets. So it's really an opportunity for them to have an exhibit booth. They're not stuck in the booth. As you heard me mention, we have a very exclusive criteria to attend our event. It's not for everybody. We want to have the feel of an executive conference where one of our exhibitors after the first show came up and said, "George, every single conversation I had at your event was juicy. It was the most effective use of my time of ever being to a trade show before, ever." And granted, they're exuberant. They just had a lot of good conversations, got some deals done, but that's what we're creating. Let's focus on the most important kind of handshake in our industry is at the end of the supply chain when the brand and the retailer are intersecting. And that's right before we reach a consumer and win or lose that consumer in the marketplace. So we're a very hyper-focused event, niche event within a niche industry. But we believe that this is a winning formula, and people have been very, very, very receptive to what we're creating and why.
That's great to hear. And then final question, what is your vision for MJ Unpacked? Where do you hope to see it? I know you're in kind of growth mode. You've done a number of events now. They've been successful. You're doing a big one in New York coming up. Where do you see this company, 2, 3, 5 years from now? You can go that far.
Yeah, I mean, creating an event, and this is, kind of going back to the circus ringmaster, a lot about creating a successful event is, one, you have to have a product that's going to be differentiated in the marketplace, because people are going to have to make decisions, especially during an economic downturn, of what events they're going to spend their time and their money on. And with our hyper-focused audience and value pricing and turnkey solutions for our exhibitors that eliminate a lot of costs and a lot of wasted time for things that they don't necessarily need to waste on, I think we have, we kind of compete on every category against every other event in the market. But building an event, it's kind of about winning mind share and building that fan base, right? And every show we've had, we've created more and more loyal fans who tell people about our event. One of my investors I recently spoke to said that 6 months ago, he said about 1 out of 4 people he talked to were thinking about going to our event in Las Vegas. He says right now, 4 out of 4 people are saying, "I don't know how, but I'm going to find a way to get there. I need to be there." So we're going to have a big breakthrough event this New York. I mean, the market's active. New Jersey's kicking it. Connecticut, all of the surrounding East Coast states. And we're going to have a very big growth year for our business personally. But, we're kind of measuring ourselves. So make sure that we're planning to have an event that we know we can deliver on, but we can scale up. And if this event catches fire the way I'm expecting it to, eventually, vision, we want to be the Natural Products Expo of cannabis, right? There is going to be a national trade show that is focused on brands and retailers. We're the only ones swimming in that blue ocean space on a national level right now. And, while everybody's trying to catch up and figure out what we're going to do next, we're just going to keep running our own race, and we're going to, have a pretty simple business strategy: disrupt, displace, then dominate.
That's great to hear. George, really great to catch up and learn more about what you're doing. And I'm looking forward to meeting up in person in New York when you're here.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Anand.